Hello and welcome to Inside 11Alive News Investigates. I'm Ron Jones. You know, when a loved one dies unexpectedly, it's not only heartbreaking, but also vital to find out what happened. But as 11Alive News Investigates found in Georgia, it could take time. 11Alive investigator Zach Merchant joins us now with show us why. Zach?
Well, Ron, look, it is an issue all across Georgia that is leaving some families waiting for answers to some of the most gut-wrenching questions of their lives. In this rural cemetery, nearly 100 miles east of Atlanta, one grave is still fresh.
There's my baby. He'll be 52, September the 23rd. But he won't.
Kathy Madden's son, Stan Branyan, died in November.
I'll never see him again. I'll never hear his voice. It's the most horrible thing I've ever gone through in my life.
Because Stan's death was unexpected, authorities ordered an autopsy. But Kathy says delays left her waiting for answers for months.
I had a feeling that he had fell through the cracks.
Stan's case was sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Medical Examiner's Office, which handles autopsies from nearly every county in the state.
It's a massive responsibility.
According to the GBI, while Stan's physical autopsy was performed quickly, it took 108 days to complete his full autopsy report, detailing how Stan likely died from complications of a drug overdose. When we asked the GBI's chief medical examiner, Dr. Jeffrey Smith, about the case, he acknowledged mistakes were made.
I apologize on behalf of the department for that mix-up.
The National Association of Medical Examiners, which accredits medical examiners' offices, recommends 90% of autopsy reports be completed within 90 days. But the GBI admits it's falling short of that standard, currently only completing about 67% of their autopsy reports in that time frame. That means hundreds of other Georgians could face delays like Kathy's.
Something has to be done.
GBI leadership says it's a challenge without an easy solution. Is the GBI Medical Examiner's Office fully staffed right now?
No.
The GBI says it averaged about 4,500 autopsies every year for the last 4 years. Assistant Director Scott Dutton says the agency is budgeted for 19 medical examiners, but currently only has 15. That breaks down to about 300 autopsies per year per medical examiner. Is that sustainable?
No.
What needs to be done to fix it?
More doctors is going to help tremendously. But
hiring them can be a battle of its own. The National Association of Medical Examiners estimated there are currently about 800 practicing forensic pathologists in the country. Roughly double that number are needed to meet demand, they said.
It may take 8 years or longer to recruit a doctor with interest in coming back with the hope that they'll come back and work here.
To Kathy, more help cannot come soon enough.
People need to be made aware, because I had no idea until I laid my son in the ground over there.
Such a sad story there, Zach. You know, as a young police officer many years ago, I've actually witnessed an autopsy. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time. 4,500 autopsies a year for the past 4 years, that's a lot.
And just for 15 medical examiners on staff, you heard in that piece,
Yeah.
It breaks down to about 300 autopsies per medical examiner per year. It's a big workload, and as Kathy Madden pointed out at the end of that story too, it's one of those things most people don't think about until, God forbid, they end up in this situation where you need those answers, and then when you're waiting for them to come. I mean, Kathy talked at length about just how tough it has been for her and her family to go through this. And you know, we're talking about this volume of cases here. Keeping up with that volume, or just trying to, the GBI says that weighs on them too. Scott Dutton, the GBI assistant director you heard from in that story, he described it as a real tension for his staff. They want to do good, thorough work, he said. They also have a volume of work coming in that pushes them to move fast. And sitting underneath all of that is the fact that the kind of work they do happens often at some of the most vulnerable times for a family. What kind of impact does the work that the medical examiner's office have, particularly on families that have lost a loved one?
Oh, it's tremendous. I mean, it's And we don't take that lightly. It is a concern that someone has lost a loved one, and each of the doctors who are responsible for the autopsies they perform, they view it that way. They are the best of the best. They are very inquisitive, so it takes time to actually do an autopsy, and then all the subsequent tests that come behind that. They have a pretty substantial caseload to keep that up, but trying to keep the humanity piece of this, as well as the practical functionality of things and taking care of people, all that goes into the mixture of how they do this work.
I can see that this is really tough for families out there. They're looking for answers. They want the answers now, but it takes time for them to process their loved one.
Right, and you know, I mean, you mentioned from your own experience just how intricate these procedures are. And one thing that we heard from a lot of the medical examiners, the forensic pathologists that we talked to, is that most people don't even realize that these professionals doing this work are medical doctors. You've got to go through med school, you've got to do a fellowship, you've got to get really seriously trained to get into this work. And there are a lot of standards. We mentioned the National Association of Medical Examiners. They have a really long list of goals, of targets for medical examiners' offices to meet. We should be very clear the GBI is at or close to meeting some important metrics, including the timeliness of actually conducting the physical autopsy examinations and conducting toxicology tests. A spokesperson for the GBI told us, and preliminary results, too, are often communicated to law enforcement or local coroner's offices within 90 days, in the 80 to 90% range, estimated Scott Dutton. But they are lagging behind that national standard for turning around that completed autopsy report. And part of the challenge, Scott Dutton said, is all of the work in addition to their lab duties that medical examiners are asked and expected to perform. When things get backed up, what happens to the cases? What happens to the law enforcement cases? What happens to the families who are waiting to get these answers?
Yeah, it slows everything down, regretfully. Cases that could move faster in a criminal investigation, obviously we want to move through those as quickly as we can. But yeah, it goes back to the individuals who have lost a loved one, especially under unknown circumstances. The doctors want to get it right. They take the time to look at every case individual, spend the time necessary to get the work done and to make the right determination. And juggling that with, like I said before, time away from the office as it relates to just doing the paperwork, but then waiting on lab results, but then having to go across the entire 5 hours across the state of Georgia to attend court to testify. That becomes a serious challenge, and it's a time killer. It really is.
You know, it takes a special person to be a medical examiner, to want to even get into that field. It's tough to try to get folks into law enforcement, let alone that industry as well. So recruiting must be tough for them. The recruiting is a big challenge, and that commute, that was a theme too. We heard so much from the medical examiners, the forensic pathologists we talked about as one of those things you don't think of as a big challenge, but you imagine how big our state is. 159 counties. The GBI is responsible for autopsies coming out of almost all of those counties, well more than 150 of the 159 counties in the state. And what we heard from Scott Dutton, from the chief medical examiner, Jeffrey Smith over at the GBI and at other offices as well, is that they will be subpoenaed, they'll have to go testify. You're not doing an autopsy when you're driving from one of those central offices to Valdosta, to Albany, out to Columbus, across the state. That's a day where you can't be eating into that backlog. It really creates a challenge. And the GBI admits it is a tough problem to solve, particularly you're talking about this shortage of people on their staff. Well, there's a compounding factor, and that's the national shortage of medical examiners. So effectively, there's a shortage inside the office, and then the pool of potential candidates they're trying to hire from is vanishingly small, experts tell us. But they do say that the GBI, that a fellowship program for future medical examiners that includes a loan repayment plan for students who sign on to work at that agency, has given them some cause for a little bit of optimism. An agency spokeswoman says they've already trained 7 people through that program and hired on 5 of them, and they say that helps make a dent in the GBI's shortage.
They're also, they say, working on outreach programs to try to expand the pipeline and boost interest in the profession at the undergraduate and the medical school levels to try to increase just the number of people who are even in that potential job candidate pool. Now, with a shortage still of 4 medical examiners inside the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's chief medical examiner, Dr. Jeffrey Smith, said he's optimistic the GBI's efforts to recruit, to hire, to train will eventually close that gap. But he is also mindful of the fact that the current shortage is having a big impact.
I regret this particular case because it just reminds me again, in case I'm ever threatening to forget it, is that we are dealing with individuals who very often, and I'm going to say the worst day of their lives, but that worst day of their life can often be longer than just a single day. And even when they get the autopsy report, it helps achieve some sort of closure, but obviously the process of grieving, the process of coming to terms with the death of a loved one can go on longer than that. So in the case of Mr. Branyan and his mother, I believe, I apologise on behalf of the department for that mix-up, and as Scott said, we strive to do the best we can and improve at all times.
If you get those 4 more medical examiners in the door over the next couple of years, do you think situations like this will become more rare?
I think so, because I think the doctors will do fewer cases. The load as far as testifying will spread out amongst the doctors. So, I mean, I have one doctor on staff that doesn't seem to have any less than about 4 or 5 subpoenas for individual jurisdictions every week. Now, not all of those are going to court, but those are potential court cases that need to be dealt with. So I think extra staff is certainly going to help. And I think the most important thing also is the acquisition of experience by the medical examiners that we are training, so that they better know how to manage a caseload, pace themselves, that sort of thing. And that comes with experience. It's like learning to drive a car. You know, you get your driver's license, well, now you really start to learn how to drive once you hit the road.
And you heard Dr. Smith there talking about the impact and talking about how in his profession they interact with families going through some of the worst moments of their life. Kathy Madden and her family, they know that all too well. The GBIs, you've heard, they're trying to find solutions to this nationwide. The National Association of Medical Examiners, they're trying to find solutions, bring more people into the profession. During our conversation with Kathy, we met with her in Greene County, about 70 miles east of Atlanta, and we met by the side of her son's gravesite. And as a part of our conversation, she, I think, really summed things up. She said, look, I don't know if you've got to fire somebody, fire someone. If you've got to hire somebody, hire someone. If you've got to give people a pay raise, give them a pay raise. But people need to know this problem exists, and it's got to get fixed. A lot of people are trying to get there, but I think Kathy really underlines that after everything she's gone through.
Yeah, but the story that you're doing today, the investigative story, you're making sure that folks are aware of this. But also, Zach, I think they need to focus on recruiting and marketing. I mean, I know it's a tough profession to try to get them into, but they still have to work on that just like any other profession that's out there. But really good work there. We really appreciate that. And folks, we just want to remind our viewers that if you have a story you'd like to share with Zach or anyone else from the 11Alive News Investigates team, you can call them at 404-873-9111 or send the team an email by reaching out at investigates@11alive.com. Thanks for joining us on Inside 11Alive News Investigates. Take care, and we'll see you next time.